started to talk about Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, and I said to you that to set up an opposition between the study of Torah and everything else is something which is not easy to understand in terms of Nigla and Pshat, the normal sources other than the Kabbalistic sources. I don't understand a motivation for setting up that opposition between study and action. Study is one of the 613 commandments like any other commandment. So now Ramchal here, we're in part 1, chapter 4, paragraph 9. Ramchal here gives a very brief summary of what he's talking about. And in part 4, chapter 2, he does it in much greater detail, which we will take a little bit of a look at. I'll read to you what he says. Some parts of it are sort of mysterious, which I don't really understand, but we'll try to get some picture of what he's saying, and then we'll do the best that we can. He says, we've been talking about mitzvos, all different kinds of mitzvos and what they do and how they bring a person closer to God and how they grant the one who performs the mitzvah some kind of perfection. However, he says, which the translator doesn't include, there is one means that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave, and its level, its status, is higher than all the other means which bring a person close to God. So he's telling me, metaphysically, this is the most powerful way to approach God. And that's Talmud Torah. Now, the phrase in Hebrew has a meaning in the dictionary, but as you will see instantly, it's not what you would associate with the meaning of the words. Talmud Torah, and has two dimensions. One is the dimension of reading and study, and the second is the dimension of understanding. So we have three things now. Reading is one thing, and study is another thing, and understanding is another thing. You say, well, boy, if I take that seriously, he means reading without any understanding at all, just mouthing the words. First thing is reading, the way you teach a 3-year-old to read. And then there's study. There, presumably, you could understand the words, but you don't understand what's being said. So you have to think about it. You have to analyze it. You get it wrong, distorted, mixed up. And then finally, there's understanding. And that's exactly what he means. He means to include reading with no understanding at all, just pronouncing the sounds. That's one level, and that is among the highest means to connect to the Creator. And you read that, and it sounds utterly mysterious. What could making sounds with your mouth have to do with drawing close to the Creator? Because, behold, he, meaning the Kadosh Baruch Hu, wanted, with his loving kindness, he authored for us. Now, mechaber in Hebrew means a person who joins things together. So the Hebrew concept of author is someone who combines things into a whole. He authored words that his wisdom decreed and gave them to us. And that is the Sefer Torah, with the 5 books of Moses, so to speak. And after that, the books of the prophets. He doesn't mention what we call the writings. I'm not sure whether he means to include them as well. He may very well mean to include them as well. That the special feature of these words will be that someone who reads them, just reads them out loud, says the sounds. And he does so with holiness and purity, and he does so with the appropriate intention. What is the appropriate intention? To perform God's will. If he reads them in that way, he will be strengthened through that with a very great status and perfection, Gadol ad ma'od, great to very great. That's one thing, just reading. Similarly, someone who tries to understand with his own understanding, we talked about this, that Ramchal says the reward you get is for trying, for effort, not for performance. So he's going to try with his own logic, his own understanding to understand, and also through knowledge of the commentaries that have been passed down to us as part of the tradition, he will acquire, again, according to his effort, perfection on perfection. So the first one was reading. The second one now is trying to understand. All the more so if he will actually get to a real understanding of the secrets of the Torah, that every one of those things that he will come to understand will establish in him, in his soul, a level, on a level upon levels, greater and greater and greater perfection. Okay, so as I said, there are these three different, there's this reading, studying in order to understand, studying, and then achieving understanding. And twice he says, it's not the outcome, it's the effort that's required. And it's the effort that determines the reward of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when you say, but how could reading words without understanding it, just pronouncing the sounds, how could that draw you close to God? I think, I'm not going to answer the question because I don't know the answer to the question, but I think there's a way to think about it. Start from the other end. You say, yeah, but understanding, I understand. I appreciate that. Come to understand, yeah, you come to understand. Okay, so what? So you came to understand it. Well, you're developing your mind, that's nice, and your performance will be better because since you know what to do, you'll be able, what you do will be more appropriate. Yeah, I hear that. Good, good. Who says that will get you closer to God? Even if he wants you to do it, who says doing what he wants will get you closer to God? I think the idea of getting close to God has got to be something whose machinery is all mysterious. It's all mysterious. It's based on features of our own nature, features of the soul, features of the way the world is constructed, features of the history of the world, and the future to which we are progressing, which we don't really appreciate. So I think our attitude shouldn't be, well, I can understand why these and these things bring me closer to God, but I can't understand why that and that brings me closer to God. I think what we should do at the outset is confess that the whole thing is a mystery. And that drawing close to God is only because of the ways in which He commanded us, because that's His goal. His goal is that we should draw close to Him, and He told us how to do it. But not pretend that we can understand how any of the performances carry that outcome. Then, at least, we won't have any complaint specifically about reading the sounds of the words. As reading the sounds of the words sounds a little bit like magic. Okay, I think we ought to look at all of it as magic. You know, let me give you just a little bit more intellectual background here. Suppose the Jewish tradition had said, God told you He wants you to do various things, and God promises reward and punishment, but getting close to God? Zero! Zero! He's infinite! And you're 93. Congratulations. But 93 against infinite is infinitely small. And so is 164. And so is a Googleplex. No matter how big a finite number is, against infinity, it's infinitely smaller. So there's no way of getting close to God. It's just an impossibility. If the Jewish tradition had started that way, we would all nod our heads and say, oh, right, gotcha. Sure, of course. No such thing as getting close to God. The idea of getting close to God should be a surprise. We should think of it as a surprise. Thank you very much. And then once it's a surprise, we should not pretend that we understand it On the inside, by our own logic, we have to take it as a given. But Rabbi said, I'm giving you this tradition, I'm giving you these texts, I'm giving you these mitzvos, and this is what they do. Even where he says that when you do a mitzvah, it will create a certain perfection, that you might be able to see. A mitzvah might strengthen your self-confidence, or your direction, your focus, your ability to concentrate on a goal and work consistently towards it. And those are things which strengthen you as a person. Everybody can appreciate that. That's true. But it doesn't follow that will bring you closer to God. That doesn't follow. Again, however much you acquire for yourself, God is infinite. So he's infinitely beyond you. So I think this aspect, the aspect of getting closer to God, has to be treated as essentially not understood. And then when you have a particular detail and don't see how it works, you don't get nervous that something's gone wrong. Yeah.
I personally feel when I think of closer is when I know someone better and say more often, then I feel closer to them. That feeling of closeness. Isn't doing that with Hashem what makes you closer? That's that feeling of closer.
You see, it's very interesting what you're saying. I got this sort of thing in an email a week ago. If I had a recording of what you said, you started by saying feel closer, then you said closeness, and then you said feel closer. It's not clear exactly what you think of. There's a difference between feeling close and being close.
Isn't feeling close based off?
Some feelings are illusions. Some feelings are mirages. Think of what's called in personal relationships infatuation. Infatuation can be often one-sided, and the other person makes use of it to take advantage of the one who's infatuated. And his friends say to him, "Dope! She doesn't care for you. She's using you. She's manipulating you." He can't hear you. He cannot hear you. He's blind. Well, I wouldn't say in love, because he isn't really love, but he's infatuated with her, right? So he says, I feel our love. But he doesn't. He doesn't. All he feels is his illusion. He feels his imagination. So the fact that something makes you feel close to God doesn't mean you're really close to God. That's just a subjective feeling. Remember what I said a few days ago about a one-sided covenant, that there are certain Jews who invented a ceremony for girls to match the ceremony for boys. They call it a brita, which is feminine for covenant, which it isn't. There's no such word. They made it up, right? And we pointed out that a covenant is a two-sided agreement. Somebody says, the king appointed me in charge of the garden of roses. You may feel that way, but if he didn't, you aren't, right? And the feeling won't help you. And on the other side, a person may be doing something that draws him very close to God and not even know it. He may not even be aware of it. So we have to distinguish carefully between feeling close and being close. Yeah, you want to say something?
Would you say you're close to like your family, you truly love them, you're constantly close, you live together, you're close, you are close, and it's that same close feeling, and obviously on a much higher extent.
Well, what was that case that I just heard about recently? Well, you had this in the Soviet Union. You have it to a certain extent today in America, where people will report family members to the wokes to have them destroyed. And they're secretly gathering information, copying emails, so forth and so on, and the other person doesn't know. So the victim thinks, I'm living together, there's a family member, a child, a brother, whatever it is. He thinks he's close to them. Meanwhile, that person is plotting his destruction. Are they really close? He feels close, but he doesn't understand what's going on in the other person's mind. He doesn't understand what's going on in the other person's heart. Who would I read about? Yes, someone who wrote about, she had a best friend. And then certain things happened in a woke high school and a woke college. And the one said something to the other. She said, how could you say that to me? Best friends? How could you possibly say that to me? Well, because something was going on in her head that this one didn't understand. She didn't realize it. She didn't know. Well, then were they really that close? Not really. So there's a difference between feeling close and being close. You have sometimes the government will infiltrate certain groups whom they think may be criminal, and some will come in and go along with them and participate in crimes and so forth and so on, so as to turn them in the end. So I don't think we don't want to talk about feeling close. We want to talk about being close. That's what does it. I don't know, I'm thinking now about Abraham. When Abraham came to the realization that the idol worship of his time was wrong, and he used to engage people in debate, and he used to try to convince them that they were making a mistake and so on and so on. Did he feel close to God when he was doing that? God hadn't spoken to him. He was striking for what was right. He was trying to destroy something that was a terrible illusion and was ruining mankind's development. Did he feel? I don't know. I don't know. He felt he's doing for God. Yes. We would say objectively he was as close to God as a person can get. But that doesn't mean he felt that way. So I don't think the word feeling is the right word here. We're talking about really representing God in the world.
Are you saying there's any forms of closeness in the world? Like, is there that actual closeness?
Say that again?
You're saying there's no feeling of closeness. You can never really know. So is there an actual closeness between people, any person and any other person?
Well, the fact that sometimes it could be mistaken doesn't mean there's never any closeness. The only point is you don't define it in terms of the feeling. It's not the feeling that creates the closeness. It's really sharing fundamental values and fundamental outview of the world and fundamental commitment to help one another. When that is really shared, then there really is a closeness. Sometimes feelings are in tune with the reality, and sometimes they aren't. There's a famous story of a man in Europe, it's maybe just a parable, who got mixed up with a day, and he was a day early, and he thought everybody else is violating Shabbos, because he thought Friday was Shabbos, and he nothing they could do could convince him that he was making a mistake. So he would go through all the Shabbos activities on Friday, thinking it was Shabbos, and then Friday night was really Friday night. He would then go back to weekday activities. So they came to a Rabbi and they said, we don't know what to do for this guy. We do not know what to do for him. The Rabbi said, I have a solution. Bring him to me. Bring him to me on Wednesday. Comes on Wednesday. Thursday, the guy's getting ready for Shabbos. The Rabbi says to his community, get ready for Shabbos. Get ready for Shabbos. So, fine, get ready for Shabbos. Comes Thursday night. These kids come to the synagogue dressed in your Shabbos clothes and everything else. They say L'chadoidi because that's just poetry. They say the Psalms, welcome in the Shabbos, that's just Psalms, right? They go through the Marv. He doesn't notice it. They say the weekday, not the day, right? Because it's only silent, right? Then he invites to the house, and they come in, and they invite him to make Kiddush, and they give him a wine. But this is a special wine, a wine with a sleeping potion in it. And he drinks the wine, and he falls asleep. And 24 hours later, he wakes up. 24 hours later, it's Friday night. And they say to him, time for the meal. You just fell asleep for a while, So he jolted him off the day. He got him back on track, right? So now, you'll ask him, I feel the holy light of Sabbath, and I feel, the angels coming and so on and so on, but it's Friday. It's not Saturday, right? Okay, so he has this illusion, right? So that's why I say feelings, we can't define it in terms of feelings. Now, when you know objectively that it is Shabbos, and you do say L'cha Dovid, you're doing it to welcome Shabbos, then if you feel a certain excitement, that excitement is attached to a reality. That's fine. But you don't define it in terms of the feeling. Okay. So you have the reading, and the reading has to be done, first of all, in holiness and purity, whatever that means. We'll talk about that when I'm going to look at part for chapter 2, which I'm going to do in a little while. And he has to do it in order to do God's will. God wants me to say these words. If he does that, he attaches to this highest influence. This highest influence is available to him, and it produces for him perfection upon perfection and elevation upon elevation. Now, some places dealing with the Torah this way is called interacting with the crown of the king. Crown of the king. What is a crown? Could have a person who's very simple, and he says, well, it's a hat. King's very rich. Says, a golden hat. Nice, That's pretty, it's a nice thing. And then I suppose you're told to polish the king's crown. You don't know that it's his sign of office. You don't know that he becomes king when they put this hat on his head. You don't know that his son is going to become king when the father either dies or abdicates and then says to the kid, right? He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that the authority of being the ruler lies in this hat. All he knows is it's the king's hat, and it's a very nice hat, and he's polishing it, right? But that's not nothing. It's the king's hat. And he's doing it because he reveres the king, and he wants to do what the king wants him to do. So the Torah, in that sense, is something like the king's crown. And that means it's precious even to interact with it on the lowest level, if you understand that that's what it is. And that also means, as we will see in part of chapter 2, that if you do it the wrong way, then you're doing something terrible, because it's the king's crown. So that's the reading. Now, the next step is studying. Studying is trying to understand. Studying can, at certain stages, if you're studying a hard topic, can involve total misunderstanding. You're really not getting anything. Your concepts are defined in the wrong way. The logic is inappropriate. When I started out learning Gemara, I had already finished a BA. I came here for a year. I was studying in a yeshiva, Merkaz Rav Kook, where the students there, high school graduates, and I had a study partner who was really very bright. And I remember there was a piece of Gemara, and I prepared it, and I prepared an understanding of it. So I read it to him, and I showed him how I explained it with all my theories. I had a BA in philosophy and in mathematics, so like I was, He sat there, he listened to me very politely, and then he chuckled and he said, "You made one mistake. You left out a period in the middle of that sentence." I had mispunctuated it. And by mispunctuating it, the whole thing was wrong. Wrong, just completely irrelevant to the text. Right? That's also learning. That's studying. And if you learn what's wrong, you've already learned something, right? So, the second is the effort involved in the learning and the effort involved in the understanding. All of that is effort. So here too, if you think of study as a religious performance, you're not going to identify the success with the effort. You're going to identify the success with the understanding, the development of the mind, the new concepts, the new appreciation. But that's not our view. Here again, there's the mystery waving its fingers at you, No, God will allow this perfection on perfection to apply to that person because of his effort. Then he does say at the end that the understanding will add to it, but we understand that the understanding is a gift. So that means God's rewarding the effort by providing the understanding, and that understanding presents a certain kind of perfection to the soul, but it's all a matter of effort. And this is what makes the study of Torah different from all the other mitzvos, that this study of Torah accesses a certain divine energy that's in the universe that the other mitzvahs don't. And this energy creates for the soul a great perfection that the others don't. And he says this also affects perfecting the rest of the world, because as we said, the whole of the creation goes into the afterlife, even the mosquitoes. So what we do has to affect them as well. And then the effect is of the study also has an effect on the world around us. Now, I'm going to elaborate on this on part 4, chapter 2. But up to here, it sounds still like we're going to have trouble setting up a comparison between study on the one hand and the other commandments on the other, because what I've just told you is study superior, period. Hands down. End of story. And yet, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon disagreed about that. And at the end of the first chapter of Bava Kama, where the Gemara discusses it, Rashi and Rabbi Tam disagree about the outcome. So more has to be said about the comparison between study and performance. But at least we see now that you can't just classify study as one of the 613, and there's a whole lot of them, and they all should be more or less on the same level, or do it by punishment or reward and so on and so on. That's not where it's at. Where it's at is this deep metaphysical idea that this provides perfection for the soul in a way that other things don't. Now I want to take a look at part 4, chapter 2, because there he adds some very important information about this. And I doubt that we're going to get there before the end of the Zman, so it's worth. He starts off by saying that in this world there are, I would say, levels of divine energy that God injects into the world to give it its life and enable it to operate. And there are different values. And among all of them, there's one which is of the highest, most pure, most divine of all of these types of energy, more precious, and in fact, it's the most precious that could be among the creations.
What's the pasuk?
I'm sorry?
What's the pasuk in which we are at the moment?
I'm in part 4, chapter 2. There's no pasuk.
Oh, okay.
But it's now in the second paragraph. Right. Now he says, this highest energy, listen to these words, God attached to a created thing for this purpose, and that's the Torah. Now, the Ramchal is a logician. He says, you have this energy, then he created something, and he attached the energy to that thing. What you hear from that description is this, that the energy is not intrinsic to the thing. It's not part of the thing. It's not part of the essence of, no, it's just attached, glued on. You know, there's a hook, and it's hooked on, which now makes it possible to interact with the Torah without getting to the energy, because it's not essential. It's not intrinsic. That's what he gets from describing it this way. Otherwise, it's what a funny thing to say. You have the energy, then he creates the Torah, then he attaches this one to that one. And he's going to point this out, that it's not essential. As opposed to something else which is essential to the Torah, this is not essential. So it is possible to interact with the Torah and not access this energy, and therefore you have to know what the conditions are. And there's specific conditions that have to be met for your interacting with the Torah to access this energy. So, for example, You have professors of the Hebrew Bible in academia, and they may spend their days reading, saying the words, and analyzing the words, and discussing the understanding and the commentaries and everything else, and they may get nothing out of it, or next to nothing out of it. And they could say could get nothing out of it because they haven't fulfilled the preconditions for getting to that divine energy through interaction with the Torah. Because it's only attached, it's not intrinsic. Then he says what we said before, that it's reading and learning and understanding. Yeah.
So if it's attached to the Torah, would mean that there is, to some extent, everything has a level of attachment of that energy that perhaps we could somehow reach that energy. Or
No. Let's see if I can give you an example of what I'm talking about. Well, this is not exactly the same, but imagine you come across a computer, and it's plugged in, it's running, it's over and so on. There's nobody there. So you think, okay, so no, that's not a good example. Let me think of something else.
like a hidden treasure map?
Well, maybe like when we used to think that you could avoid corona by sanitizing, by sterilizing your hands. Because what? Because on his hand, there could be invisible things that you don't see. And by interacting with his hand, you might or might not be affected by them. So if you put on gloves, you won't be affected by them. Or if you sanitize, you won't be affected by them. If not, not. But if you don't know they're there, I'm sorry, that's the opposite way. It is there and you don't know that it's there and you are affected. I want a case where it is there, you don't know it's there, and you're not affected. You don't interact with it. Yeah, it's like it's like when Zoom was first invented, and you buy a computer, and you don't know that Zoom is programmed into the computer. You don't know it's there. So you're communicating by emails, right? It happens to be a much more powerful way of communicating in the computer. You just don't know that. So when you send the emails, you get absolutely nothing out of the Zoom because you're not using it. Here, you're studying the Torah. This guy's making a living by being a professor and publishing his papers. I hope my tone of voice communicates the amount of respect I have for the kind of thing that he's doing, the vast majority of cases. And his interaction with the Torah has no connection whatsoever to this energy because it's only attached. Since it's only attached, it's possible for him to interact with this part and not that part. It's hanging on a hook, and he doesn't get to the hook. It's not intrinsic. If you tell me that in the computer there's low-level radiation, then when you work on the computer, you're getting radiation because that's there in what you're dealing with. But not something that's hanging on a hook in the back that you might get or you might not get. So the fact that it's only attached means that it's possible to interact with the Torah and not get it. And that's what he's going to explain.
But would the Torah be the only place where this energy is attached?
Yes. He created this energy, and he created the Torah as the thing in the world that you give access to it. And nothing else gives access to it. So now you already have, a parting of the ways, that the study of Torah gets access to that energy, and nothing else does. Now you ask, so what do the mitzvahs do? They get access to other energies. Well, let me finish it out because I said it's problematic. But since the Torah, since the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the study of Torah and all the other commandments, there's got to be something that all the other commandments do that's also necessary for the world. So even though this is the highest energy, and it grants perfections, greater perfections to the soul than the other energies, still, if you don't interact with the other energies, you're missing those other perfections. You're missing them. So you can't achieve completeness just by studying Torah. So you get access to the highest quality, but there's all the rest that has to be done as well. And the same is true for the world. The single most powerful effect on the world comes from studying Torah. But that doesn't make the world complete. It doesn't realize all the potential of the world. It requires all the rest to be able to do that. So now the idea is, I have this the Torah with its highest energy, I have all the other mitzvahs with all the other energies, and have I compare the contribution to the completeness of the world, it's not obvious which totality gives a greater completeness to the world. Of course, you need both. Like I told you with the case of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, the assembled company said, why are you discussing which is greater when you can get both? And you need both. But abstractly, you could raise the question. And in a certain sense, let's put it this way, the highest energy, it makes the single greatest contribution, but if you don't have all the other energies in place, then it won't be completed and won't be utilized in the appropriate way. Let me give you a very, very rough analogy. I read in the history book that when the Jews came to Poland 1,000 years ago, they introduced money. Until that time, Poland was a barter society. You have shoes and I have sheep. Let's make a deal. I have you 16 pairs of shoes, you give me a sheep, we'll trade. Right? Money is a gigantic, gigantic step forward in economics. Yeah, it definitely is. But if you have some people who hoard all the money and other people get stolen from and so forth and so on, your society will not be any better off. Because the money has to be used in an honest way, in a productive way. And if it's corrupt, it won't do that. So if you talk about the single most important feature in building an economy, having a money economy rather than a barter economy is gigantic. But it may not lead to a better level of life if the people who are operating it are utterly corrupt. Now, this is a very crude analogy. So the idea could still be raised. What makes a bigger contribution? The monetary structure versus the habits of the people to behave towards one another in a fair and productive way so as to enable the monetary structure to deliver the fruits that it's capable of delivering. So it's something like that. The idea here is that the Torah's influence is very general, on a very high level. And when you do a mitzvah, a specific mitzvah, you take a certain energy that's identified specifically with that item, that piece of the body, that context, but then makes it complete, makes it perfect. Whereas the other sort of energizes the whole, enlivens the whole, but doesn't fulfill it. So it was sort of like if you have a deep sea diver. So on the one hand, he'd better have a tube to the surface providing him with oxygen. And on the second hand, it'd be nice for him to have been trained to understand what he sees and understand the tools that are at his fingertips to be able to engineer the things that he has to engineer. But all that is means. If he doesn't do it, then it's a waste. Nothing happens. So here, in a certain sense, the perfection provided by studying the Torah is backdrop, and then the actual mitzvos are what complete it. Now, as far as the actual mitzvos are concerned, you can rely on the communal effort. If A teaches B what to do and B does it, so then the outcome is credited to both A and B. Because had A not taught him, B wouldn't have known what to do. So it isn't that A has to do with his own hands. But if it doesn't lead to performance, then it never achieves that outcome. So that's part of how you see the question of whether study is greater or whether performance of mitzvahs is greater. What's fascinating to me, as I told you at the beginning, 2 days ago, that here you now have a way of setting up the problem. Study versus the rest of the commandments. But it's based on all of this Kabbalah, all of this metaphysics. There are energies and different types of energies, and some are general and some are specific, and some are higher and some are lower. That's a whole machinery that you need to set up the question. Now, I would love to hear someone explain how to set up the question without that machinery. If it can't be done, I've asked a number of people, this is being recorded, so maybe you'll find someone who can set up the problem without the machinery. If he can, then that will, how should I say, it'll deprive me of a certain argument that I would like, but I want to know the truth. Our argument would be that in setting up the problem this way, the rabbis of the Talmud were hinting to us at this deep metaphysical reality. Since I can't understand how they set it up without that. If someone could explain in a simpler way how to set up the opposition between study and action, and that won't need the deeper machinery, then I will gladly give up my idea and say that it isn't a hint at this deeper reality. But if it isn't, then we have something important here. Okay, next time I'll go back to part 4, chapter 2 in more detail.